Hello, hunters. It is time for some prismatic builds that do not require an exotic class item. One of them happens to be the best boss damage strategy in the game. Maybe it's in the top 3 or top 5. I don't know. Just depends on when you're watching this. Those of you who have been playing Arc Hunter should be pretty familiar with this first setup, which takes your melees into the prismatic world. Liar's Handshake buffs your follow-up melee attacks very aggressively, and we are going to leverage the benefits of Prismatic instead of just staying on Arc. Part of the benefit of going on to Prismatic is that we get to retain some of what makes this build special on Arc while playing on non-Arc aspects. Speaking of which, we are going to be taking Stylish Executioner and Winter's Shroud. Winter's Shroud is very simple. It tags nearby enemies with a slow, but it also enables Stylish Executioner, which requires an enemy to be affected by an elemental debuff in order for it to trigger. By dodging to restore your melee attack, you'll be able to punch and dodge non-stop, again, very similar to the Arc setup. Our melee is going to be Combination Blow. It stacks to 3x, and we get to avoid one of the annoyances of the Arc setup in more endgame content, which is triggering lethal current and potentially killing your target with an explosion versus a melee attack. Grapple for your grenade is a pretty strong pick, but also because most of the other grenades just aren't that appealing for this setup. And in case it's not implied already, Gambler's Dodge for this one. Facet of Dawn feels like a staple. The issue, similar to Skullfort Titans, is that you're not really using your guns here. In fact, I would almost discourage the use of your guns unless you need anti-barrier rounds, in which case I would definitely consider Facet of Dawn, unless you think you only need Radiant Orbs while it's in the artifact, then you can live without it. Facet of Sacrifice, I think you can lock this one in. You're gonna have a light-based buff on you, and you will be getting ability Final Blows. Courage is also a great idea for bigger enemies or endgame enemies. Your dodge provides a darkness debuff in the slow effect, so dodging and then wailing on a target gives you an even bigger hit of a melee attack. Facet of Protection feels like a given as well. You're going to be in melee range of pretty much everything, pretty much all of the time, so taking that bonus resistance is never a bad thing, although in lower difficulty stuff, you can definitely live without it. Ruin seems pretty tempting. You are going to be freezing stuff somewhat often if you're good with your dodges, but I think you could live without it if you truly wanted to run something else. The final slot I've again given to Facet of Purpose for an Orb of Power effect depending on what you're looking for. Restoration, Woven Mail, these are good effects, and triggering this fragment is not hard to do. You just pick up an orb. Now, I think you could absolutely flex this out if you wanted to. Maybe you're doing something more specific. Maybe you want to run something else for whatever you're running at the time. Flex it out. I'm a YouTube video. I'm not going to stop you. But I do think it is a good default because it works everywhere and it's pretty much always beneficial. Your artifact shouldn't look too different to Warlock and Titan prismatic setups. You're picking up nearly all prismatic offerings, much like literally every other prismatic setup during episode 1. This build will function without the use of the artifact, but stuff like galvanic armor is really going to increase your survivability. Stats-wise, I am running 100 resilience and 100 discipline, and then middle of the road, everything else. You're not going to need strength at all because we restore our melee through our dodge. Recovery you shouldn't need a ton of, mainly because in lower tier content, it just doesn't matter. And in higher tier content, if you get blown up insta-gibbed, no amount of recovery is going to help you. I would have medium mobility though. Armor mods, we're looking like a Titan, focusing on melee mods. I stack a lot of heavy-handed, since the likelihood of you proccing heavy-handed twice in less than 5 seconds is actually quite high if you're in solo content. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard affair here, although if you are going the heavy orb route, definitely consider Powerful Attraction. So this setup works pretty much the same way as the Arc version. It takes a little bit of time to get revved up, but once you get the engine rolling, you should be able to clobber most things in your way. However, on Prismatic specifically, this is probably not a build that I would be running in low tier content unless I were a really big enthusiast, because it is horribly slow and inefficient to kill enemies in this way. when they die really easily and there's like 1,000 of them. You can point and shoot a Kvostov at pretty much anything outside of a Master or GM Nightfall and just immediately destroy everything. The only reason I'd want to run this setup in low stakes content is if I really, really like to punch things. On Arc, you have the chain lightning effect to do a bunch of AoE and stuff like that to handle a bunch more enemies. But on Prismatic, it is single target. Although, if you are savvy with your dodges and you plan them and you hit a lot of enemies with the slow and the freeze and all that, you can get some AoE to happen that way. Where the tides turn, however, is in mid-tier content. You're seeing champions, you're seeing tankier enemies, maybe you're seeing regular enemies with a bit more HP than usual. That's where the value of this build is. You get an enemy weak, you punch it to get combination blow rolling, then you start the combo. Dodge to apply the debuff, melee kill stacks combination blow, dodge to apply new debuff and get your melee back, continue forever, endlessly proccing, stylish executioner as well. You'll be slowing and freezing enemies a ton. That's 2 of your 3 anti-champion needs, by the way, and you'll have Radiant almost permanently if you have Radiant Orbs or Facet of Dawn, so that's 3 out of 3. No champion weapons needed, although you'll need a little bit of finesse to pull off the unstoppable stun, since you need to dodge near an unstoppable champion twice in order to freeze them. This is also where I'd probably be breaking out a 1-2 punch shotgun for bigger melees. Just remember to punch first to prime Liar's Handshake, the cross counter, then shotgun, then punch again. This build is full throttle as soon as you're at 3 stacks. You do not want to drop stacks pretty much ever. I remember a time I was running this build and thought I would get cute with using my primary weapon for literally 3 seconds, and I died. Just don't do it. Do not do it. Just keep the melee train rolling. Your defense is what facilitates your offense. You get your healing, you get your invis so you can reposition, you get that protection, versus just trying to shoot stuff. We're not shooting stuff. That's not the setup you're running. You're running the punch things build. So like punch things. However, this build does have a few weaknesses. First off, it is much more of a solo-oriented build. I would argue that you don't really need to be clobbering a lot of beefier targets in group content by yourself. You're going to have teammates to help you with that. I mean, most of the time, ideally. Sure, it's flashy to be able to insta-gib a Grandmaster champion, but if you're the kind of person who knows how to navigate a GM with this setup, then I'm under the assumption you're probably running with other people who also know what they're doing. Another thing is that in a group, you won't always be able to reliably stack combination blow to ×3 and keep it there, especially in more traditional strike formats. Battleground type content is where I think you have a bit more freedom in using this setup though. Some solo weaknesses include just your buffs running out, right? A transition between parts of a lost sector means you gotta rev the engine back up. Play it carefully until you're good to go again. Another weakness is if you can't kill your target before you run out of all your buffs, it's gonna be a little tricky to navigate that space. Again, we're looking at lost sector bosses here. Eventually, the party's gonna end, and if there's nothing around you for you to ramp back up, you gotta rely on your guns. So make good choices on that front, otherwise you might be in trouble. Another weakness, not enough buff slots to see if you have combination blow stacked up. Armor charge, radiant, amplified, woven mail. It's all taking up my slots, like most of the time. I can't see nothing, man. I need more buff slots. You might have also noticed that not once did I ever mention Transcendence in this setup, and that's because the build doesn't revolve around its use, although you should be able to get it somewhat reliably through your light melees and tons of freezing of enemies. Honestly, the main reason for going Transcendent is the extra damage resistance if you have protection on, which you should, and I guess transference in the artifact while it's there. In these clips, I'm getting it somewhat quickly, like a minute or so, which isn't bad, but it's just more of a bonus, nice to have kind of a thing, as opposed to something we're actively trying to optimize the build around. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Hunters, y'all have some of the best variety when it comes to exotic class items, and I think the world of Prismatic really opens up when you start collecting exotic class items. Without class items, it feels like the two most popular builds otherwise are just Celestial Nighthawk with Still Hunt or a Jura Falcon setup with a Void Weapon. We're going to be talking about the Celestial setup. So the Celestial Nighthawk Still Hunt setup is more of a damage build more than it is something like a typical build, and that's because, shocker, it's a setup specifically to deal boss damage. It's not really something I would consider for low tier content because there are far better, easier, more fun setups for that kind of stuff. This is a bit more of a mid-tier, high-tier, end-game type setup. Raids, dungeons, GMs, master content, maybe legend campaign, lost sectors too, although you gotta maybe make some loadout changes in there. Ultimately though, this is a setup that all hunters should know while it's in its current state whenever they gotta turn on the jets and crank some boss damage. However, the setup that I'll be talking about also has what I think is a pretty fun neutral game. So, what are we doing? Nighthawk, put it on. Still Hunt, put it on. Aspects. If you look up information on this particular setup, you're gonna see a fair amount of Winter Shroud and Stylish Executioner setups. But that is because people are doing armor swaps. They are swapping from a build that works with those two aspects to their Nighthawk when a damage phase starts, and then going back to their original setup, whatever it might be, usually involving an exotic class item. However, if you go into something with locked loadouts, Stylish and Shroud with Nighthawk results in a horribly boring neutral game where all you do is shoot your primary. I'll explain this more in a future section, but if you're in a situation where you can't armor swap, or maybe you just don't want to armor swap, go with Gunpowder Gamble and Threaded Spectre instead. Or if you really like going invis, stay on Stylish. Abilities-wise, you're probably going to lean more towards Darkness things, especially on a GPG setup, which is doing a lot of solar damage, Threaded Spike for melee, and Duskfield Grenade is probably the safer pick out of the two. Withering Blade has a bit more range though, and if you're fighting something where you need to trigger Radiant and it's super far away, and you also need to debuff it, you're probably going to want that instead. I don't know how often that's really happening other than the Witness, but you should also have like Radiant from a Well of Radiance or something already. Fragments. We got 6 of these things. Number 1, Courage. Debuff the target with the Darkness debuff, get bonus damage on abilities. This is going to boost your Nighthawk shot. The damage increase isn't super giga insane, but if you're a min-maxer, I would probably grab it. Solitude also helps trigger Courage, but it's also just a really good option for all parts of the game. And considering that you're probably going to be using this build in mid-tier, high-tier, end-game content, severing almost everything you shoot, that's not a bad thing. Facet of Dawn to proc Radiant for ourselves, specifically when a damage phase starts, but it also helps with our neutral game. You could probably just use Radiant Orbs in a raid setting with Powerful Attraction, but where things are more unreliable or you're just moving forward a lot, I would probably throw it on. Purpose gets a lot of value here because it will be providing restoration, and that's very good for your survivability outside of a Well of Radiance if you don't happen to have one around. It's good for the neutral game experience as well, just regular content, all that kind of stuff, and it's the only way you'll reliably be gaining health back in a tough situation. Sacrifice is an option too, but if you run with a Darkness primary, you might not need that Darkness energy. You could opt for Grace if you run with a kinetic weapon. Alternatively, Devotion should be up and running a decent amount of the time with Solitude, so that's something to consider. Ruin is going to buff up your ignitions from GPG, but it can also be a play if you wanted to go more stasis heavy with your abilities or your fragments or your weapons to take full advantage of the fragment. Bold Endings, it's got Headstone. Ias Luna's got Headstone, just a couple of examples. Hope works for more reliable dodge reloads if you feel like you need that. I don't think you will, but it's there if you want it. Your artifact should take advantage of all the normal prismatic things, although they're not as mandatory as almost every other build that we've done so far. However, if you are rocking a stasis primary, do grab Creeping Chill. You should be doing enough slows and freezes that it is worth it. Winning Hand is also an option if you end up using Bold Endings. I could see people comboing that with like Pro Memoria in situations where you're not using what you should be using for the damage rotation. Stats, honestly feel like they barely even matter in this setup, so I just went my very traditional hunter setup. High resilience, high discipline, and everything else, I just don't really care that much. Decent mobility, decent recovery is nice too if you can afford it, and then dump stats everywhere else. The mod setup is pretty strict though. Special and heavy ammo finders are definitely important. Sometimes it just kind of depends on where you are. If you got someone making ammo for your team, for example, not really as important. I would say a siphon mod is definitely wanted all of the time though. The more you're trying to min-max your damage, the more I'd say lean towards a dexterity mod in your gloves, just one. But in real world scenarios and just in practice, I don't think it's a dire inclusion. Otherwise, just round things out here. Either two cost mods or like heavy-handed or something like that. It depends on if you like running stat mods as well, because I do. Chest, we got resistances. Just don't forget to do a reserves swap before rallying. Legs are 2 solar surge and 1 solar holster. This is important for the damage rotation. Class item, powerful attraction for orb pickup, time dilation for extra surge time, nothing crazy. Okay, so this is a damage build. It's a boss damage build. Let's review the rotation. Step number 1, transcend. Throw grenade at target and flick a melee to debuff it for courage and to get yourself radiant. Step 2, burn all of your golden guns, the sniper, the super, get them out onto the target ASAP. Step number 3, 5 shots of still hunt. That's going to deplete the rest of the ammo in the magazine. Step 4, swap to specifically Apex Predator rocket and fire off shots until your holster reloads 1 sniper shot into the mag. Reconstruction Apex Predator is used because it's a solar rocket so that it matches our surges, and also just because it's better than the other solar rockets. But if you have a demolitionist rocket that's solar, I think you could probably substitute that in. Otherwise, just some sort of rocket that gets multiple shots. The whole point is that we're trying to avoid reloading our weapons here. Step number 5, when that shot has been reloaded into still hunt, fire the last shot, pop your super, dodge reload, do it all over again. Obviously, the Witness is the premier boss target to use this rotation on because the damage phase is quite long, but it's pretty good for all other boss damage needs. You just might not need to go as long or as intensely. For the most part, just bringing Still Hunt and a Nighthawk is going to suffice for like a GM Nightfall or something like that. All that, it just kind of depends, right? It depends on where you are. The neutral game with Winter's Shroud and Stylish Executioner is terrible if you're on Nighthawk. You really need to swap off of Nighthawk for those aspects to be good. Swapping to Liar's Handshake or some kind of exotic class item, whatever you do. But if you don't have that ability, just don't. The neutral game with GPG and Spectre is far more enjoyable, although nothing too complex. You'll be able to get very easy and reliable GPG procs with your melee and solitude going off. Your Duskfield grenades also doing some work. Maybe you're running with a darkness primary and you're getting some slows or freezes off, especially in episode 1 with creeping chill. Don't forget about teammates as well, helping with darkness debuffs and all that kind of stuff. If you can get some transcendence activations off, that's cool. But the grenade is quite literally hit or miss, so don't stress too much if you're not getting 1 transcendence every 15 seconds like Warlock and Titan can. Also, if you just wanted to stick on Nighthawk but wanted to ditch the sniper in other activities, maybe you're in a GM that doesn't demand you use Still Hunt, or maybe you're in something a little bit easier, you can do that as well. Throw on some different primaries, use a different exotic, play more towards the anti-champion needs of your team. All of that's completely fine. One of my friends just runs the Call and Sunshot. Right? You can run the Call and like Zally's Bane and Microcosm or something. It doesn't matter that much as long as you're handling what you need to handle. Just, it's a scale, right? If you need a lot of boss damage, you skew more towards the boss damage thing. If you don't need as much, then you can kind of dial it back. It just depends on where you are. So Hunters, those are 2 setups that don't need an exotic class item, with one of them being one of the best damage strategies in the game. I'm very much looking forward to discussing exotic class items going into the future now that I've done some setups that don't need them. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.